some articles and stuff. And I pull up this thing on Slam Wrestling that talks about let me pull it up here. Talks about Sandy Parker. And I'm like, who? Sandy Parker, who was a black woman who wrestled years ago, actually was the first black woman to ever hold a world championship in pro wrestling. I'm like, who? Like, I'm legitimately sitting there going, I don't know who we're talking about. And what makes it so, I'm reading the article, and it turns out that the author, Greg Oliver from Slam Wrestling, was writing it because he found out like a couple of days ago that Sandy Parker had died 2 years ago. And that's absolutely bonkers. I'm like, okay, so she's potentially a historically significant person in pro wrestling, specifically for women's wrestling. And look, I've never heard of her. I'm not going to pretend, I'm not going to be one of these people who's like, oh yes, Sandy Parker, yes. Oh, no, I've never heard of her. And it comes out like this. And then Dave Meltzer today posts an obituary that's going to be in the Observer tomorrow, but he gave subscribers some free access. So I'm thinking, why don't we all do a little research together? Why don't we all sit around and find out about Sandy Parker? And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that because I never heard of her, you obviously have never heard of her either. You couldn't possibly have heard about her if I've never heard about her. That's not what I'm saying, but maybe you have, and all the more power to you. And I would have loved to be in your shoes before this, but I was thinking, if anything, we could read the obituary together, and maybe we'll glean some new information, or just discover someone completely new and where she fits in history here. Because the fact that she passed away 2 years ago and no one picked up on it, like nothing, is incredibly sad. If she is indeed like this hallmark figure that Dave seems to corroborate in his obituary. So this is a subscriber exclusive. Shout out to everyone at Figure 4. I'm sure you don't mind me in this circumstance doing this. It's not a regular practice, but I think there's something very interesting to pull up here. And look, if you don't have a subscription to the Observer, I think you should for times like this. This is tremendous. And if you don't, well, you probably never will. So, what's the use, right? But I still think everyone at some point, as a wrestling fan who's interested in, particularly in the past, should have, or at least have had an Observer subscription at some point. Anyway. So let's get to it. Let's read this Dave Meltzer's obituary about Sandy Parker. Sandy Parker, the first black woman to hold a major world championship, passed away in June 2022. But nobody within the wrestling world knew about it until it was reported this past week by Greg Oliver on Slam Wrestling. While almost all sources listed her birthday as March 2nd, 1952, Oliver reported her being 77 at her time of death, at the time of her death, and her actual birthday being November 1st, 1944. She started wrestling in 1968 and worked regularly through 1977, with the last several years seeing her as one of the few women who got semi-regular bookings while not being part of the Fabulous Moolah stable, particularly as a star in Japan. Parker, who was 5'2", was one of the top in-ring women wrestlers of her era, an underdog babyface who mostly made fiery comebacks. Oliver credited Chris Bergstrom with finding out that Parker, real name Cassandra Jolene Parker, had died more than 2 years ago while living in Las Vegas. Susan Green, who briefly held the NWA Women's World Tag Team titles with Parker and considered her a friend, had tried to contact her recently after her Christmas card she sent was returned, and when she tried to call her, the phone number was disconnected. Holy shit, this is so incredibly sad. Green said that in 2022, Parker had a caretaker living with her who wouldn't let her talk to anyone. Odd. Green said she mentioned Windsor, a city that Parker lived in, heard it, and insisted on talking, and they talked for 15 minutes. Parker said she was going to the hospital for tests, but she was very excited about their careers. Talking about their careers. They agreed to talk a week later, but Green couldn't get in touch with her and tried to call her every day with no answer. 3 weeks later, she called and the phone was disconnected. Oliver said that they know she went to University Medical Center in Las Vegas on June 21st, 2022, I guess he means here, and died before the end of the month. How fucking sad, man. Parker's name popped up in the news in 2021. WWE decided to honor Ethel Johnson for their Legacy Hall of Fame with the idea she was the first black woman wrestler. It was a mess. Oh yeah, I remember this. It was a mess because there were those on the internet who said that, and whoever made the decision or was told to find out who the first was found Johnson's name and no more research was done. However, Babs Wingo, the sister of Johnson, preceded her as a wrestler by a few months, so the premise wasn't accurate. And for whatever reason, likely an honest mistake, or perhaps figuring nobody would know, the footage used for Ethel Johnson was actually 1970s footage of Parker, which I eventually reported at the time. Yeah, I remember that. That was fucking embarrassing. That was an embarrassment by WWE. The families came out and everything. You remember that stint? Yeah, that was a fucking mess. On May 13, 1973, Parker beat Miyoko Hoshino in Choshi, Japan, to win the WWWA World Championship, the famed red belt of All Japan Women's Wrestling, which would be the same belt later held by legends like Jackie Saito, Jaguar Yokota, Chigusa Nagayo, Bull Nakano, Lioness Asuka, Manami Toyota, and more. Mildred Burke, who had been the top star on the first women's wrestling tour in Japan in 1954 as world champion, was affiliated with the promotion and booked women like Parker, Jean Antone, Marie Vagnon, Betty Nicoli, Sharon Lee, Jane O'Brien, Sylvia Hackney, Princess Warstar, Jackie West, and Lita Merez, the mother of future roller derby skater Dave Merez, for Japan in the early days of the promotion. Many pops to the roller derby connection here by Dave. That's actually tremendous. The WWWA name actually came from Burke, as after her split from Billy Wolf, she formed her own promotion, the WWWA, and made herself world champion, a belt she held until her 1956 retirement. Because of her 1954 tour, Burke was thought of in Japan as the female version of Lou Thesz, the first authentic world champion who came to the country and had a credibility in that country that the other world champion, Fabulous Moolah, never had. Moolah did come to All Japan Women in 1968. I didn't know this. And even lost her title for a few weeks there, but they used Burke's title as their main title from 1970 until the close of the promotion. She lost the title back to Hoshino on June 10, 1973 in Ibaraki, Japan. No black women held a women's world title again until Aja Kong beat Bull Nakano for that same title in 1992. Aja Kong is black? Did I just learn something? Or are we? Erika Shishito is a Japanese professional wrestler. She currently makes appearances, blah, blah, blah. She's the founder of, her mother is Japanese and her father, the late Henry Manigo, is an African-American. Okay. Who worked for the U.S. Army at Tachibana Airfield. Huh. I did learn something today. Parker was born in Vancouver and attended matches regularly, often a few times per week as a teenager in the early 60s. She would also go to Seattle for matches. She knew the male wrestlers in the area, and some talked with her about breaking her in, but at the time she passed. A few years later, when she was living in Windsor, Ontario, she decided she wanted to be a pro wrestler and found Luke Klein's wrestling school in Detroit. She was mostly trained by women wrestlers, Lucille Dupree, Linda Klein, and Mary Jane Mull. And 4 months later, she started working on some shows for The Sheik in 1968. She started traveling the next year and moved to South Carolina to train at Moolah's stable, given that she seemed to be the only way to be a full-time touring pro wrestler in that area. Well, yeah. Yeah, it was. While she and Tony Rose were probably the best known women wrestlers in the stable, she had many issues with Moolah, who was 50 but kept herself as world champion in those days. Moolah wanted all her women to come off as ladylike to the public and uphold an image, while Parker, who was gay, what? Would hang out at gay bars. Well, this is like, how is this woman's legacy been flying under the radar for all these years? What a twist! And Dave just like drops it there. It's like, yeah, because she was gay. She hung out in gay bars and Moolah didn't like that. Wow. While Parker was not the only gay woman wrestler, the others all hit it, and Parker did as well, sometimes dating male wrestlers, and was even married at one point, which was a fairly common thing, right? At the time. And I'm not saying that it was right, but it was like fairly common, and not just in pro wrestling. Like, this was an actual thing. Parker toured North America as part of the Moolah stable from 1969 to 1972. She said Moolah read the riot act to her about going to gay bars and wanted Parker to date her nephew. Susan Green, who was also gay and part of Moolah's troupe, said she knew to hide it from Moolah. Parker claimed that Moolah was a hypocrite, claiming she had dalliances with some of the women she trained. I don't remember this little bit of Moolah lore. She claimed that at times Moolah tried to get her to sleep with promoters for better payoffs. Well, yes, Yes. While on a tour of Hawaii while still working for Moolah, Green and Parker beat Rose and Donna Cristianello in 2 out of 3 falls on November 24, 1971 at the HIC Arena in Honolulu to win the NWA World Women's Tag Team Championships. It really didn't mean much as those belts were rarely talked about. Oh, how the more things change, right? 3 days later at the Honolulu Civic Auditorium, Rose and Cristianello won the belts back. After leaving the Moolah stable, Parker wound up based in Los Angeles and affiliated with Burke. She mostly worked on the West Coast or in the Southwest, as well as Hawaii, and became a star in Japan. This has been fascinating so far. I don't know about you. This is an education here. Besides her holding the WWWA title once, she held the tag titles 8 times, although it was all over a 2-year period. Masked Lee and Parker beat Mariko Akagi and Yoshiko Miyamoto, who later became Jumbo Miyamoto, for the titles on June 11, 1973 in Sasebo, and lost them back on June 25th in Ofunado. They did another switch with the 2 teams, with Lee and Parker winning on July 17, 1973 in Yokohama. They lost them back on July 24, 1973 in Nagoya. Parker and Antone beat Junko Sasaki and Peggy Kuruda on May 16, 1974 in Shizuoka. They lost them back on May 21, 1974 in Kochi. Parker and Betty Nicoli beat Sasuke and Kuroda on June 3, 1974 in Gifu before they vacated the titles after winning them. Parker and Nicoli beat Sasuke and Akagi on June 14, 1974 in Nagoya. They lost to Miyamoto and Sasuke on June 28, 1974 in Morioka. They won them back on June 29, 1974 in Ishihara. They lost them back on July 9, 1974 in Osaka. Then they won them back on July 21st in 1974 in Takikawa. They lost them to Akagi and Miyuki Yanagi on July 26, 1974 in Muronen. Parker and Antone won them on July 30, 1974 in Mizusawa. Miyamoto and Akagi won them on August 5th, 1974 in Tokyo. Not the most compelling bit, but nonetheless, you get a good idea how, the titles were essentially hot potatoed. While she mostly worked for All Japan Women, she did do a 1974 tour where she was Mula's tag team partners for the IWE in Japan, which probably indicated how strong her reputation was in Japan to see a major men's group insist on being part of matches where Mula brought herself in as the top star along with Paula Kay. She noted when she was in Mula's stable, Kay told her outright that, quote, "I don't like black people." But Parker shot back at her, and eventually through the travels on the road, they became friends, and Parker later said, "You're right, Sandy. You have to talk to the person. You have to hate or like the person, not the color." Aw. Either that or Paula Kay is a hell of a worker. She noted that when they were on tour in Alabama at a restaurant and were eating together, that the restaurant served the other women, including Kay, but not her. She said Kay saw this, grabbed the guy behind the counter, and said, "If Parker didn't get the food in 2 minutes, your ass will be dead." That's tremendous. Okay. That's pretty cool. But she worked only a few dates in California, occasionally billed as the California State Women's Champion, and occasionally went to the Central States and St. Louis to work with Antone and Nicoli. So most of her career was in Japan until finishing up in 1977 on a tour that included her losing to Akagi for the WWWA title on March 23 in Matsudo. She worked a variety of jobs and would regularly attend the Cauliflower Alley Club events in Southern California and later Las Vegas as her link to the business. She was contacted to be part of a documentary called Out in the Ring about gay wrestlers, but decided against doing it. Wow. Okay. Good read. And I legitimately had never heard of her. And I think, I think it's kind of crazy that, even among historians or whatnot, like it's not a name that comes up often. But then again, okay, I understand, like if she called it quits in 1977, right? That's what Dave says. Until finishing up in 1977. Most of her career was in Japan until finishing up in 1977. So I think what Dave is saying here is that she wrapped up her wrestling career in 77. So if she hadn't done anything at all from 1977 on to 2022 when she passed away, I can understand why a lot of fans, like, first of all, how a lot of fans just never heard of her, right? Because you don't keep yourself active. You don't stay in the conversation. Well, eventually people just like move away. Look, I think this is tremendous. And this is why I anyway, rest in peace to her. The fact that we haven't heard about this until 2 years past her death is just, that's a story in and about itself. She had a caretaker that allegedly didn't let her talk to anyone. Like that's insane in and about itself. Like there's a story there. There's an investigation. There's a tale to be spun here. It's not as if she had become a recluse because she'd still go to the Cauliflower Alley Club. Like that. It's just remarkable. Like she's a gay black woman and she's going to wrestle in Japan. Like that's where she settled in. And she, for Mildred Burke's spin-off promotion when she broke away from Wolf, like there's such a story there. What am I missing? See, this is why this right here, this story right here is exactly why it's proof. Actually, it's consecrated proof right here as to why we can't let the history of wrestling be dictated by corporations, by WWE and even AEW to a degree, right? They're doing good now, but you never know. These are companies, right? We've talked about this multiple times on this show and for years, even going back to when I was doing shit on Fightful, okay? The problem with WWE basically owning all of the videotape of all the wrestling that existed in North America, or at least 85% of pro wrestling that happened in the territories back in the 70s, the 80s, the problem, and WCW and ECW, the problem is that this archive of truly historical stuff remains in their possession and they can do whatever the hell they want with it. Now, what do they want to do? They want to drip feed it on their WWE Vault thing, which has tremendous stuff, don't get me wrong, but it's drip fed as opposed to when we had the network, when we could just flip it open and watch whatever we wanted. This is why I think it's disgusting when people create these obscene, the obscene is going a little far, but these incredibly twisted narratives around Dave Meltzer and try to discredit him so that when it's time to focus on history from a man who has covered it all, who has seen it all for 40 years, this man is the cornerstone of everything that has happened in pro wrestling. He can remember stuff. He's talked to the main people. He's always been in contact. He's always been at the center of it. And somehow, because of how certain guys with podcasts don't like him, and because of how certain fans don't like when he doesn't give 5 stars to the most mundane matches, he's suddenly he's unreliable. He's biased. He's terrible. He's a misogynist. He's all these things. This is exactly it. This is exactly the example right here as to why the history of pro wrestling cannot be dictated by these promotions, by these corporations whose objective is not to promote pro wrestling's history. It's to make money. So they will pull out whatever they need from pro wrestling history when it's time to make money. But in the meantime, all these things fall to the wayside. So when something like this comes up, I'm like, this is tremendous. This is why we have to do our best to protect it. I don't have a solution. I don't know how to do it. Dave's not going to be around forever. Anyway, Sandy Parker, man. Sandy Parker died in June 2022. We only found out about it 4 days ago or so.